Hello, welcome to this guide for Section B questions for the OCR A-Level History Paper 1. So in our school, that's the Early Tudors unit. In this video, we'll have a look at the format of questions and we'll focus on what it is that examiners are looking for. Then we'll look at what that looks like in the different phases of an answer. So we'll look at the introduction, main body paragraphs and the conclusion. So Section B is worth 20 marks of the 50 marks that are available on our paper. We'll have a choice of 2 questions, and we recommend that you spend approximately half an hour on this task. Your answer is going to be assessed against Assessment Objective 1. So that's your ability to demonstrate, organise and communicate your historical knowledge and understanding. And in your answer, we should see an introduction that lays out the criteria for your judgment and what the main points are going to be in your essay. There should be at least 2 main paragraphs, ideally 3, and it's important that those paragraphs contain interim judgments at the end. And then your answer should end with a balanced conclusion. In this video, we'll have a look at each of those points of introduction, main paragraphs and the conclusion. So we'll unpack those in a moment or so. So here's what the questions might look like. The first common type is the extent of agreement that you have for a presented hypothesis. So as you can see, that's going to be a statement. And then how far do you agree is your question. The second common question can be an assessment of causes. For example, assess the reasons for Thomas Cromwell's fall from power. And lastly, we might get a straightforward evaluation task. For example, how serious was the opposition to Henry VIII's religious changes in the 1530s and 1540s? All 3 of those question layouts have been used in previous examinations. But the advice that we're going to give in this video will cover all of them. It's kind of applicable to all of them, regardless of which task we're faced with. So let's look firstly at the structure of our introductions. The question that we're going to use here about Cardinal Wolsey's domestic reforms is a made-up question. It's not from a past paper, but we'll just use that as a model. So the introduction starts by laying out the criteria. Basically, how are we going to judge our thinking? What are we going to use to decide how far we agree with the statement or otherwise? So you can see I've laid out a few there. Now we don't need to refer to every one of those criteria in every paragraph, but those will be the themes that we're going to be discussing when we start to analyse the content that we present. The introduction then moves on to outline the major content that will be covered. So I intend to write a paragraph on each of these. One on his legal reforms, one on reforms of taxation, and one on reform of the church. So each one of those will be a main body paragraph. And then finally, the introduction is going to show the direction of my argument. And that's going to be repeated and expanded in my conclusion. So our introduction has 3 phases. Our criteria, how we're going to judge, the content, that's the main body paragraphs, and then lastly, an indication of the direction of our argument, our decision. So let's have a look at the format of paragraphs in the main body of our answer. The paragraphs are going to start by laying out our line of argument. In a GCSE answer, this would have been the P, the big point in our Bill paragraphs. But it's going to outline the direction for the paragraph. We then go on to explain and substantiate that point, applying specific knowledge to demonstrate our understanding and knowledge. We also refer back explicitly or implicitly to the criteria that we set out in the introduction. The paragraph then continues, ideally with a balancing counterpoint. This follows the same formula of specific knowledge and reference back to the criteria that we laid out in our introduction. And then crucially, the paragraph finishes with an interim judgment or a mini conclusion. We have to do this. If these are missing from our essay, it cannot get into the top band of marks. So this screen and the previous slide is one of the main body paragraphs. I would then go on to write two more paragraphs, one on taxation and one on the church, but we won't demonstrate those in this video. So finally, let's look at what we need to put in our conclusions. So this again will have some key features. Firstly, it will present our judgment, unpacking in slightly more detail than we did in our introduction. We will then present a counterpoint to make our conclusion balanced. And then finally, we'll present our winning point. Again, applying these to the criteria, explicitly or implicitly, that we set out in our introduction. So our conclusion also has key phases within it. Our main judgment, a balancing counterpoint, and then our winning point. So just before we finish, let's briefly recap. Our introduction will give criteria, that's how we're going to arrive at our decision. It will lay out our content and also the decision that we're going to come to. Our essay is going to have two, ideally three main body paragraphs. Crucially, those paragraphs will contain interim judgments or a mini conclusion at the end. And then finally, we're going to write a balanced conclusion tied to the criteria that we set out in our introduction. Good luck with your revision. I hope this video was useful.